I don't know what I need to say. How many of you have known Mike for 10 years?
A lot of people.
20 years?
Still a lot of hands. Keep going. You could probably get up to 40. Yeah.
40 years.
Yeah. There.
Is it cheating? Since birth?
About 50 years. I know he came in 1973. Finally settled down back.
There are a few. There are a few.
Yeah,
Right.
okay. So those of you who have known him for 50 years, it's your turn. I have known Mike for, I say, more than 30
Probably,
years.
yeah.
And it's been wonderful to get to know him, but it's been very difficult to have him showing at the gallery. And while I'm looking at Lucy, thank you so much, because Lucy had Opus 5, and let's give her a hand to keep that gallery going. And taking care of many artists who are also here. You know, we in this profession, I hate to say business, really appreciate what you have done for the community. So I don't need to tell you, Mike is an artist, and what else do you know him? An architect, a city planner, professor,
Neighbor.
And no matter where he goes, he attracts people. You can look at his community. And where's the center? Mike's home, Mike's office. And that's how I felt. And, you know, he has done so many of these places we consider common, because where we can take a walk, take a hike, it's in our neighborhood. But he observed, and he really turned that places into a masterful piece. It doesn't matter the size, the medium. And he's actually a very quiet person. Do you know that?
I'm leaving.
You know, because you really have to spend a lot of time with yourself to be with that piece. And he's giving that to us. So with that, I'm grateful that he has chosen us to show his work. And I thank Jennifer to put this together with me. She's here. And
You're blocking Mike.
And thank Mike, Mike's family, Mike's daughters, and this phenomenal book. You know, if you don't know who he is, you just know him in the last 10 years, you got to read about this. And just going through, I said, "Whoa, I thought I know Mike. No, I did not know he did this. I did not know he went these places." So with that, Mike Pease, thank you so much for coming today. Okay? And I know there will be a lot of questions, so let's focus on the questions, because your history with Mike is highly appreciated. But today is about Mike.
Okay. Thank you. Well, hello everyone, and it's wonderful to see you here. It's wonderful to be here. Can you hear me in back? Okay. I could probably talk for hours, but I'm not going to. I'd like to get at a few things that are really important here. First, I have to say, it has been a wonderful experience for me to walk into this space and see all of my work up in one place. Myself, it is just wonderful to get a sense of what all of that diversity is, and I obviously can't do that in my home. And it's been a long time since I've had. I stopped doing commercial gallery work a long time ago, as you probably know, and so I haven't had any kind of of this sort of exposure for a really long time. And even then, it always tended to be something that was all of that moment. But seeing this, which represents probably 40 years of my work, has been really wonderful. And there are a few things I want to say. It's already, some of this is already in the biography that you've probably seen on screen. It's all also in that book, and I'm going to talk some more about the book after I've said these few things. But here, what you're seeing is really two different phases of my life. All of this work is pretty much, I think probably all of the pieces are pieces that I've done since I became a professional artist. And so especially the smaller ones are ones which have been done intentionally to be displayed on walls for people to look at and decide whether that's meaningful enough for them to want to take them home with them. My earlier work was, I began drawing really seriously when I became an architecture student, because in those days before computers, we really had to be able to do freehand drawing in order to deal with the ideas of architecture. And I liked drawing. I knew that before I went into the program as part of the reason I signed up for architecture, but it was a big learning experience at that point. But basically all of my drawing then was in studios, on pieces of tracing paper, and in sketchbooks. And that was true probably for the next 10 or 15 years after I graduated as well. I had one good, really important experience I'll tell you about now. It will explain some of this, maybe some of my later life. When I got out of architecture school, I had a fellowship from the AIA to travel for a year. And it was, boy, that was a great thing. And it meant that I didn't have to work. I had enough money to actually move around, and I spent most of that time in Europe. And I was in Europe, what I was really focused on was discovering the way people who had been living in essentially urban settings for centuries, working and living and depending on the materials that were at hand, had made the communities that they lived in. And there was nothing like that in the US or in the world that I knew at that point. And I was already very much interested in the idea of community as an architect. Part of me was really interested in homes, places where people live, the intimate life, but also part of it was in that larger sense of support for community and what architects can do to support community life. And that part of it that I saw in Europe, we didn't have experience for here. And so when you look at some of the drawings that are later than that, but are still from that same spirit, especially the ones from Greece, and there may be some from Italy here, I don't know. I've done a lot of those drawings over time. You'll see that focus on streets, but streets in a world where a street means a living room for a community. And to really understand that was really, really important for me. And my drawings from that time of those places had a huge impact on who I became as a professional when I came back to the US and started working as an architect and as a planner, an urban designer. And having said that, the one thing I really want to emphasize about all of this work is the way increasingly now in recent years I have understood the way drawing has made me who I am and helped me become who I am. That drawing as a way of connecting with the visual world, with the physical world around me, it's indescribably important to me. And it's one of the reasons I wanted to do this show, and one of the reasons I worked on this book, is that I really would like more people to understand the idea of drawing as a kind of language that could help anyone to internalize the nature of the visual world that we live in, the physical world we live in. And absorbing that world through the process of looking and trying to put on paper what you see is a way of internalizing that kind of understanding that stays with one, and it gives one a vocabulary, let's say, uh, of feelings, of the practical world, of the impact of the visual world on lives that has been important to me, but I think really should be, I would like it to be important to all of us. So when you see the pictures around here, you will see that a few of them, like the figure drawing, the big figure drawing that's around the corner there, some of these pictures that are just of barns, there's one somewhere that's just of an old truck. That kind of stuff is really my fascination for interesting objects. But most of this work is about places. And that's something that I've gradually realized was essential to my way of living, was that I care about places personally. And when I look for good places, places that are human-made, places that are in nature, places where human and nature are together. I seek out places that make me feel good. And I have realized that that's the way in which my drawing and my work as an architect and a designer has intersected. Because really what I want to do as an architect and as a planner is make places that people feel good in. So that whether it's when you're cooking your dinner, or you're reading a book, or you're sitting down with friends, or whether you're walking around and experiencing that larger world, or meeting with other people in a community, getting together with your neighbors to talk about politics, whatever it is, that if you're doing it in a really nice place, it feels different. It supports that in a way. It makes you feel good about who you are. And so much of this work is really about places, and it's about my constant searching out of places that make me feel good, and then my urge to understand them better and to incorporate them into myself. So basically, that's what all of this work is about. The one other thing I want to say about the drawings that wouldn't be obvious is that I stopped doing work with commercial galleries. I was a professional artist for a long time, for many decades. And I worked in lots of different galleries. And at that point, although I was still doing all the things I've just said to you about how I find work, I still had to filter my work through the context of what a gallery wanted, what people out there were willing to pay for, and so on. And I did that. And yet, when I got to the point where I was finally ready to stop being a professional artist, and Susan and I could travel more, and we had time, and I didn't need to do that anymore, there was a brief period of time after I quit my last gallery, a brief period of time when I didn't draw. But it was very brief, because very soon I realized that drawing is part of my life, not just, it wasn't something I was doing just as a profession, and that I had to grasp that and I had to be drawing, but I had to come back to it and think about it in a different way, because now I wasn't having to filter it through that notion of what people will want to buy or what the gallery wants me to produce at this point. So I've experimented for a while, but it didn't take me very long to figure out that what I really wanted to do was to get back out in those landscapes that I love. And so I started going through all my old photographs and pulling out the photographs, most of which I had already worked with before, just watercolors and so on, and find the ones that were full of stuff that I had explored in a sort of broad, simple way, you know, with quick strokes of a brush or quick strokes with my pencil. I learned how to make fast drawings. All of that impressionistic stuff, which I loved doing. It was really fun. And some of the drawings here, like the figure drawing, and some of the larger pieces have a little bit of that left. But basically what I was doing was looking for places in nature that I still really cared about and that I could see a lot of in the photograph. So then I would put one of those photographs on my computer screen and put it next to my easel, and then start drawing it a little bit at a time, looking at the leaves, looking at the subtle differences in color between the first layer of the mountains and the next layer of mountains, and to watch the way the clouds were being shaped by the light. And I started doing that, and for the past few years, that's really what I have been doing. It's not going into galleries until now. None of it has been in galleries. It's been just sort of accumulating in my shelves at home. So when you see a piece like this, or any of the larger pieces here, that's what you're looking at, is that more recent experience where I'm really sort of focusing in on understanding in detail what's going on. Finally, let me talk about the book. This is total coincidence that the book and this show happened at the same time, but it's a wonderful coincidence. The book began several years ago after I had done a series of lectures. I was already retired from the university, but I was being called in periodically to talk to people. And I'd done a series of lectures there to students about just the stuff we're talking about right now. And I thought, wow, I really ought to try to put that down. And I did. So I started at that point putting together ideas about photographs that I could use, things I could say that would explain that whole background in drawing and what it has meant to me, and why I think it's important for architecture students, even though they have computers that make great illustrations, to learn how to draw, because learning how to draw is a way of understanding what you're seeing in a way that a computer can't do for you. And so I started writing that out, and I put it together finally with enough coherence as an idea that I could get it printed locally, spiral bound, and send it around to my kids and to have friends and family look at it. And we did a lot of editing. There was a lot of commentary back and forth. But that's about as far as it went. And then suddenly my daughter, Andy, who so she took it over, and it's here. And the one thing I mean, all of the stuff I've been talking about is in the book already, but a lot of other stuff too, because it talks a lot about my early history. And more significantly, for any of you who are interested in this aspect of it, it also shows a lot of my work as drawing work as a professional. Now, that's stuff that doesn't go into frames and go onto gallery walls, but there's a lot of stuff in there. Sketches that I've done for my own sake, sketches that I've done to talk with people about design ideas. Over that long period of time, I've been designing little things. I stopped working for big offices way long time ago, and when I became a teacher, that gave me the freedom to be able to work architecturally the way I want to. And so at that point, I started basically, mostly here in Eugene, basically helping people remodel their houses, build new houses, small stuff like that. We did much of our own houses over a long period of time. And on the other hand, it also gave me the freedom to explore the bigger ideas of community design and urban design. And I've done a lot of stuff, and drawings representing both of those parts of my life are in the book. And so that has really been a pleasure too. So there you go. The book is around here somewhere if you want it. Yeah, people already have it. And I'd be glad to answer questions. Bill.
Mike, thanks. That was wonderful. I'd like to get back to your European experience for just a minute.
Yeah.
I think you said that in Europe you found urbanites building their own communities with materials they had at hand. Okay, and in this country we don't have anything like that. I'm wondering what exactly that means. That building their own communities for centuries. Materials they had. Could you say a few more words?
Yeah. Did everybody hear that question? Okay. Yeah, this is a great question, and I could spend a lot of time talking about this because it's very meaningful to me. I think it's really clear to me that the nature of our culture has, especially in the last 100 years or so, has pushed us toward really emphasizing the family domain as the heart of how we live. And even if we don't want to do that anymore, we're sort of forced into living that way by virtue of the decisions we've made about how we move around by car and the way in which that necessarily spreads us out. And because we're spread out, it means we have to own all the things we need ourselves, which means we then have to have larger houses, which then means we live farther apart and we're more dependent on vehicles. All of that is what our culture is. And certainly there was a time before cars in our society when people were building their own houses in small communities here and there. But most of our community was rural at that point, and it was people were living off the land. And still, you know, I'm not a historian by trade by any means, and there's not a lot I can say. Certainly, if you do go through places like Boston or Old New York or parts of San Francisco, you can still find neighborhoods that were built in the era that was before at least the predominance of cars. And you'll see that there is more emphasis there on the nature of common places. There are gardens and parks and courtyards, and some of the streets are really still, in some ways, you can still see that history of people living more in the collective world. But we don't do that by and large. I think the reason it's so important to me right now is partly personal. I felt that for a long time, but it's also, I'm looking at a world now where you can see the damage that has been done to all of us globally by virtue of our dependence on material goods, our need to be able to really heavily use resources to support the way we live. And we know that that is not viable over the long run. Some of us know that. We don't all know that. I know it. And so a lot of my life as an urban designer, especially in more recent years, has been in trying to explain that phenomenon and also to talk about what a world that in this country, what a world might look like that is different than that, where there is more emphasis on sharing, more emphasis on local community, all of that. So does that get at it, Bill?
Yeah, it does. Thanks very much.
Okay. Any other questions?
I have a question
Yes.
about your process.
Process, yeah.
I've heard over the years that you use, in your color pencil drawings, you use just the three primary.
Yes.
Do you still
Let me talk about, I'm glad you said that because I meant to talk about that and I forgot. Okay. So what happened really was,
The question.
the question. The question is whether it's true that I still do these color pencil drawings with just three colors, and am I still doing it that way? The answer to all of that is yes. A little bit of history about it. I taught at the university for a long time in the architecture department, and drawing was one of the things I taught. And I also taught design. And one of the things I noticed and talked with other design instructors about was that at that point, when I was first starting to teach and when I was a student, the only way really that students knew how to work in color was with watercolor. I don't know why that was. I actually do know why it was, because it's an easy medium to carry around. You can work on different kinds of paper and so on. But it is not a flexible medium. It is not an easy medium to sketch with, to make quick ideas, to change things around. And so what the impact of that was for design students was that during the design phases, you didn't work in color. The only time the color really got to be into the work you were doing was when you were finishing it and you're making a presentation for other people to see. Then you could take the time, you knew what you were trying to produce, you do the drawing and you do the watercolors as a way of explaining that. So I was also teaching drawing classes at that point, and I was really struggling with that, trying to think to myself, well, what's a medium that might be more comfortable in the studio during the design process. And somebody pointed out that colored pencils are very flexible that way, and I started working with colored pencils on my own just to try it out, and realized, yeah, this is a great system. The only problem with it was that you had to be carrying around these big boxes of 40 or 80 pencils or whatever it was in order to get that whole range of colors. And I was talking with somebody else also who taught drawing at the university, and I was talking to this guy about it, and he said, well, you know, they're transparent. If you put one on top of the other, you get a new color. And that was enough to get me started thinking about the possibility of actually working with a few colors and being able to mix them together. And I finally, pretty quickly, got to realize that, well, this is sort of like color photography. They do all that with 4 different inks, black, red, yellow, blue. So I started hunting around to see what the right blue and the right red and the right yellow would be, and indeed worked out a process where you could make anything, draw anything, with just 3 primary colors. Well, later I started adding black because it was easier, and that's what color printing does too. It uses black plus red plus yellow plus blue. But all of the color pencils that you see here, color pencil drawings, are made that way. Some of the earlier ones don't have the black, the more recent ones do. But it's still, the colors themselves are the 3 primary colors, red, yellow, and blue. And it has become second nature to me so much that it's hard for me to imagine doing it any other way. I can't think, why would I go pick that green when I can just make it with this combination of these 3 pencils that I have around all the time? So that is part of the answer to the question that you're asking me. But one of the important things to me was that the whole reason I chose that medium to teach to students was that it was flexible enough that it was easy for them to work in their studios and to do a little sketch and to add a little bit of color and then to come back and change it a little bit later and to do their final renderings that way if they wanted to. Very, very flexible medium. It the stench of the material doesn't fill the air. It's not messy. You can work on any kind of paper pretty much with it. And as I began doing artwork commercially, professionally, putting stuff on walls, selling them through galleries, I realized that what I was wanting to do was to make bigger drawings. And initially, I did a lot of those as watercolors, really big watercolors. Very difficult to do, easy to screw up. When I began to discover how I could do that with colored pencils using those primary colors, suddenly a whole new world opened up to me. And that's really what allowed me to become more or less successful as an artist. Because I could fairly quickly, like the piece that's down at the end there, that's a piece that was done fairly quickly. And I did a lot of pieces that are like this size or like that one. There was a point at which I was doing those very impressionistically with really wide strokes. And if you looked at it, you could just see all the mixing of the colors on the paper. But it was very easy to do, and it was fun, and people liked it. So that kept me going at it. And at this point, the real beauty of that medium for me is that Susan and I live in a very small house. It's a wonderful house, great place. But it's a very small house. I have a studio which is, like 10 by 10 with an easel and lots of drawers with paper and stuff in it, but it's not very much space. And it's very much part of our little house. And the way I work basically is to set up a photograph on the screen that I want to be working on right now, and it's there all the time. And so when I get to the point where I'm through doing my crossword puzzle, or I'm not quite ready to have a nap yet, or whatever it is, I can go into my little study, pick up those 3 pencils, turn on the computer screen, and just start where I left off, and start adding blue and yellow and red and black and building up this image. So it has been a wonderful medium for me from that point of view because it allows me to draw the things I want to draw at the speed I want to, whenever I want to, without having to worry about any of the complications of other media. I have worked in oils, and I love the medium, but it just doesn't allow me to do art the way I want to do it right now. Yeah.
Speaking of speed or time, doing these things.
Yeah.
When you say this piece of work over here took just a little bit of time.
So a
What
piece.
is a little bit of time?
Okay, a piece like that, probably the one that's down at the end, that was something I probably did 5 years ago, and I'm guessing that was maybe 30 or 40 hours of work. This one is probably 200 hours of work. I was doing gallery work, big pieces that I could do in 2 or 3 hours with, drawing like that. And, they're very impressionistic, but still a lot of fun, but it's a different process. And doing it like that allows you to really get into it as an overall idea and to explore the general nature of it, but you don't see the difference between one leaf and another or one little piece of cloud and another. And that's really what satisfies me at this point. I need to be absorbed in the subject hour after hour. And so that's how I'm working now. Yeah, Hannah.
I wanted to talk a little bit just about one image. I mean, you do Idaho and Fall Creek, but we just returned again from Portland to Eugene, and that's Michael Pease landscape. Every time I go, I think about your.
You mean driving between here and there?
Here
The Willamette Valley.
Portland, which basically could be boring, but it isn't because you've painted it many, many times, and
Yeah.
it's your landscape.
It is. I love it.
feel
Yeah.
it
Yeah.
Every time I go there.
Yeah. Did you all hear that? Hannah is just saying how much she is aware of the work that I've done in exploring the Willamette Valley as a place. And it's really true. Over all of these years, different times of year, different times of day, I have been captured by all parts of the valley. And interestingly enough, this little sideline, I started doing, my first commercial work as an artist was selling very small drawings of the Willamette Valley at the Saturday market a long, long time ago. But there were so many people who came by and not only bought those little things, but talked to me about, they would come back later and say, my whole understanding of the valley has changed because of what you've done. And, how are you not going to feel good about that? And I still love the valley and I still draw it. So, yeah. The piece, I think the piece around the corner where Dan Schlickman is well, that's actually in Eugene along the river. So it's not exactly the valley, but yeah. I'm still drawing valley pieces all the time. I'm working on one right now at home of Lake West, Fern Ridge. So, and that's part of the valley. But anyway, it's all of that stuff.
Mike, I'm visually illiterate, but I know a little bit about education, and I was enticed by your comment that you taught drawing as an architect. And I wondered if that could happen today. Somebody hired as an architect would be teaching a drawing class. But more than that, I guess I completely believe your statement that drawing would be important for architects and for anybody.
Yeah.
But I wonder practically, how do you make that happen in the age of computer-assisted drawing? Will it happen, and how will people figure that out?
It's a really good question, and it's certainly a question I have. I can't make it happen. I'm not in school anymore, so I can't have any voice in that. That was a big hope for the making of the book. And Andy has a friend, for example, who was on the architecture faculty in San Luis Obispo, Cal Poly, who has been using that book with students. You want to say anything about that?
Yeah, so he's having that exact conversation and wanting students to be comfortable with hand drawing again. And so he's using that book and to his, 120 students to be able to look at both the Prismacolor pencil, but also the watercolor and the pen and ink, because the book has a lot more. So I think it's a little bit of an uphill battle, but there seems to be like a circling back to the hand drawing to be able to get back to it. Yeah, thanks.
And the book actually does talk about that issue very specifically. So hopefully if somebody who is teaching architecture or is a student sees that, may find it as helpful as a way of moving in that direction. I don't know. I think it's important too.
Any more questions?
More? Yeah.
So when you're doing using pencils, do you make mistakes and how do you correct them?
Yes. In fact, I guess probably every medium has its own limits and capacities with respect to that question of what happens when you make a mistake. To some extent, the more difficult it is to correct, the more careful you have to be as you do it. I mean, a pen and ink drawing, you can't take the pen lines out once they're in. And watercolor is very much like that too. Once it's dried on the paper, there really isn't anything you can do about it. Color pencil is sort of like that because the pencil color does get absorbed into the paper, but there are some limits. And I've discovered a lot of ways of being able to, I can't remember what the name of the paper is, but I think it's called transfer paper. It's kind of a waxy surface paper that is semi-adhesive. And it was originally used, maybe still is used, to transfer a pencil image onto a plate, an etching plate, so that you could do the drawing, move the pencil drawing onto the plate, and then do the etching based on that. But it also turns out, if you're really careful with it, you can go through, it's sort of a translucent material, so you can see through it if you put it on paper. You can, if I have a place where I just made a big mark and it was really not what I wanted, I can put that and at least diminish it to some extent. And sometimes I even use a knife and scrape colors off the paper in small areas. Erasers don't work very well with colored pencil, but those two things do. So yeah, some mistakes are possible, sometimes not.
You've let us know that you work at the studio mostly.
Yeah.
Do you also do plein air? Do you work outside?
Not a lot anymore. My early history, especially with traveling, and still when I travel. In fact, one of the things when I travel now is I realize, well, I shouldn't say this. 10 or 20 years ago, I remember saying several times when I was traveling that I'm not going to take my camera because if I take my camera, I'll just shoot a picture and then take it home instead of spending the time in front of it with my brush or my pen or my pencil and sketching it out. Now, of course, I always have my camera with me because it's my phone. And it's, and it's actually, the camera is better than anything I've ever had. So it's hard, I can't use that excuse anymore. But still, when I travel, yes. I tend to take a little kit with watercolors, color pencils, ink pen, pencils, and I'll deliberately, if there's any time, I will deliberately sit and draw from life. And again, because I know that drawing directly from the subject is by far the best way to really absorb it. I can't do that with these drawings. It takes way too long, and it's a different kind of discovery. It's still very, very satisfying, but it is a different kind of discovery than sitting there on a bench with a book and doing a sketch. But, if I'm going to do something like that in a place like this, it's going to be a rough sketch. That's all it can be. I can't spend 100 hours there. And over 100 hours, it will be changing from day to night and rain to sun and all of that. So, but yeah.
One more question there.
Yes.
I really enjoyed reading your statement. I was reading it yesterday, and I love the piece that you mentioned about just your love of place, whether it's constructed place or a natural place or something that you just come across. And I work in rent places too, and so for me, when I'm wandering around, going from place to place, like even coming up here today, I came down the expressway and I just saw this like, God, that rail yard against the sky. It's like I want to stop, but if I stop, of course, I won't make the left.
Right.
So that happens to me almost universally. And then when I go out and I say, okay, I've got the day or the evening or whatever it is, I'm just going to go see what I see when I take pictures. Never happens in the same way. And I just wondered if you experienced that, and so how you deal with it, or if it's just like you know.
Well, it's a really good question. And the question basically is, how do you find the time and the coincidence to capture really wonderful images in the real life world, right? Am I getting it right? Yeah. And so I would say my life is, with respect to that, is very different now than it was when I was younger. Because especially when I first started working in galleries, I needed a lot of images to work with. And a lot of my time as a professional was spent out there. And I would drive up and down the valley at various times of day, various times of year, taking photographs, waiting for the right moment, coming back, making notes. I need to come back here a month from now, whatever. So I did a lot of that. And these days, I have your experience. It's better with the phone because I always have the phone with me and it takes great pictures. But most of the drawings I'm using now are actually based on photographs I made a long time ago when I was doing that process of going around with a good camera, taking the time, setting up tripods sometimes, but really doing the photographs very carefully. It's important. I don't think I said this, but it really is important for anybody to understand the work that I do, that it really starts with that photograph. The stuff that's on the wall here, the most important decisions are the ones that made the photograph in the first place. Selecting that moment in time where the light was just right, and then cropping it, figuring out what exactly I want to put in a picture. I can still change that when I come back to the studio. I can change the lighting a little bit. I can certainly crop it in a different way. But it's interesting to me that almost always I wind up working with the photograph I took almost literally the way it was, because it was such an important moment when I did it, and I was really being careful about it at that time. So, I maybe could have become a professional photographer and sold my photographs, but what I wanted to do was draw. So I didn't do that. But the photographs are still there. And occasionally the picture, for example, that is around the corner near the back of the square one of West 10th Avenue, that's something that I took. That photograph was from this last spring, taken with my little camera and my phone and iPhone. And it's a great photograph. But I haven't done very many of those from recent photographs because I still stop and take pictures. And occasionally they become drawings, but most of what I'm doing is still based on older photographs.
Mike, thank you. It's a wonderful show. Everything is so beautiful. My question is, have you ever experienced the frustration of driving up and down the valley to look for a great spot, but there's no place to pull over?
Well, yeah, sure, that's happened. But, at least in the days when I was spending a lot of time doing this, I would just figure out some way of doing it, coming back on foot or coming back another day when the light was similar or something. But yeah, and the other thing is, in those days, I didn't spend much time on the freeway. I was on little roads, back roads. Yeah, but
Often 2-lane and there's a ditch.
yeah, right. Yeah, you're right. You're right. I think I do remember a couple of times blocking traffic to take pictures. Yeah.
Well, after this wonderful talk, I don't think I need to say anything. But please spend some time with Mike's work. Spend some time with nature, with your community. And I thank you for spending your afternoon here with us. This is very heartwarming. And thank you, Mike. This has been.
Thank you, HP. And look, the other side of that is I really need you to thank Jennifer and HP for what they've done here. They have done a great job.